Harlem or in Harlem, and then he's going to offer these rhetorical lessons. Next slide, slide 4, getting down with Dewey, getting on our boogie with Bert. So Dewey's all about experience and shared experience, but again, what is an experience? And again, we try to get all, experience is an experience. Guys, it's not that tough. But try to get, all sort of fancy. Dewey calls it a moment of consummation. When a person has some unitary impression that is felt in reaction to something, and that consummation creates some sort of new understanding. So I go and look at a painting by the painter of light. What was that guy's name? I can't remember. Or something a little bit different, a Picasso. And it makes me, I go, ooh, that's really interesting. It makes me sort of see things in a different way, to question perhaps the norms of modern art. I don't know. And so perhaps that is consummation. That is an experience. But the process, as Clark says, and I guess Dewey, is located in place. And that stuff, or that place, is aesthetic, and that's rhetoric, and rhetoric because it influences. And so, even as I glance at some paintings that I have, or even my map, so I always know where I am, we exist in physical places, and so that's where the experience is. And really, I guess everything around us is aesthetic. Well, no. It depends. I don't know. Go to Walmart. So wow, the last bullet point here, this is confusing. To me, this just sounds like perception or interpretation or reading of a place. But think about the fist, I guess, as an example, going back to the previous chapter. If we experience things differently, whether they be online or physically. Let's say we are all hanging out in Detroit, and we look at it, and we get something from it, and it changes the way we see things. That's an experience. Okay, next slide. Slide 5, adding some Burke. Again, this stuff theoretically is sort of confusing. Identification is a key term here. Identification is sort of the whole kit and caboodle of persuasion to Burke. And so there's some key ideas on the top of page 116 and 117. Basically, this idea of, and it's actually well, here's what he says. While John Dewey helps us understand how experience is aesthetic in its form and effect, Kenneth Burke's insight that rhetoric does its work of influencing by prompting change and identifications helps us understand how the aesthetic, which remember Burke's understanding formally as experience, does rhetorical work. So we will identify with different things, identify with different groups, there's all sorts of different things. I might identify with certain values, I might identify with certain aesthetic norms or anti-norms of fashion. I don't know. But the last sentence on the top paragraph on page 117 is pretty interesting. If the rhetorical mode of the influence is put to work by a prompt to identification, the realm of the rhetorical does indeed encompass experience, especially if we consider the possibility that most of our experiences work rhetorically by prompting us to adopt, at least temporarily, some sort of new identity. So, this idea that maybe I might go to a museum, see something, and then I come out of it a new person. So again, it's sort of the same stuff. And rhetoric, whether it be the experience, as Clark puts it, sort of strikes an attitude, or strikes a new attitude. I like the little phrase, "Come attitudinize with me." So, it all boils down to art or whatever it might be, jazz, anything that is aesthetic is the conversion of emotion into eloquence, which is Burke's sort of fancy language for all this stuff. Eloquence, I guess, is the same as consummation. I don't know. So I see a painting, it makes me feel something that prompts a reaction. Maybe that reaction, it influences me. I have a new identity. Again, it's sort of, I think Clarke here is beating a dead horse. He's saying pretty much the same stuff over and over again, just in using different terminology. The key idea, middle of page 117 and bottom of page 117 to 118, I think God, I'm already 20 minutes, boils all this stuff down in an easy to digest smoothie. He says this, again, this is on middle of page 117, and that is, well, I already said middle of page 17, to the, this is what I want to read, and this I think is the key. What I'm calling a rhetorical experience, this is Clarke. What I'm calling a rhetorical experience most often takes the form of an encounter with a text in Burke's work, but not always. He uses music and visual arts as examples as well, but I would say those are texts too. But the essential concept is this. Aesthetic encounters take the form of experiences that are rhetorical in their effect as they prompt attitudes. Those encounters become civic in their consequences when those attitudes affect identities. When they prompt people who share the same experience to share as well a sense of who they are individually and collectively. Think about the experience of going to a 4th of July fireworks display. The whole thing is not about, you know, it's about America. And America means fire. And then the next slide here, what I say is enough theory already. There's so much stuff in here all over the place that just, you know, makes me want to gag with a spoon. And so this is what he says, page 120. That is, our experiences express who we are and what we value in the same way that art expresses the identity and values of the artist. My point, yes! My point is that this aesthetic project of making experience meaningful is inherently rhetorical in both motive, that is trying to put this together, I guess, and effect. Experiences once composed, whether by us or for us, asserting meaning. And when we find ourselves identifying with that meaning because we have adopted as our own the attitudes it expresses, we have been transformed. Such transformation is the work of rhetoric. So all this is confusing. Experiences are rhetorical, and possibly can change the way we see things, change our identity, bring us together. Yeah, that's it, I think. I don't know. God, it seems... maybe I'm just stupid. Okay, so the next bit, let's get jazzy. This is where he tries to apply everything to the National Jazz Museum of Harlem. Here are the main points from all that stuff that I teased out from the reading. Number one, the museum is intentionally designed to create rhetorical experiences because it is intentionally designed to change folks. They want folks to have a new identity. They want folks to create a new sense of shared community and offer, in fact, a new community for Harlem and the United States. Two, though, part of all that rhetorical experience stuff springs from the fact that the whole thing isn't an ordinary museum, I guess. That's sort of what I'm getting from it. It ain't finished. The museum is much more like there should be a bunch of workshops and stuff like that. So he talks about all these different workshops. So it's not like going into one museum like the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, or just touring around the State House grounds. It's like a series of all these different experiences. We got live music, we got folks teaching people how to play music and all that type of stuff. So it's quite a bit different than perhaps your normal place of public memory. And all those experiences, this is number 3, work together to forge a shared experience, a shared community. And you can see the last paragraph in that section, which again sort of sums all this stuff up. And that is basically it starts on 127 and moves up to 129 because there's a big old picture on 128. Basically, these events, all the things that they do, the workshops and all that type of stuff, do more than commemorate what Harlem has been. They attempt to present contemporary Harlem to residents and visitors alike as a community continuing to perpetuate a culture that produced a quintessentially American music. But they also attempt to change the way the community is identified, and that changes occur when the museum's patrons find themselves feeling a part of the community as they attend these events, etc., etc., etc. And all that type of stuff, he says, this is the last couple of paragraphs, that is fundamentally rhetorical because, as Johnson puts it, the meaning of a thing is its consequences for experience, how it cashes out by way of experience, either actual or possible experience. So there is more going on in these experiences than just these experiences. Other rhetorical experiences can follow from their influence, and that is sort of moving on and expressing things and changing things, etc., etc., etc. It's all a long process. But those are the 3 things that I think are perhaps the most important ideas from that second section, which is really just a description of the whole National Jazz Museum of Harlem. Is not necessarily just a normal museum, but all these series of experiences that lead to new identities and new community and all that type of stuff. The final lessons from Clark, and this is again what I've sort of teased out from the writing here. Number 1, some places of public memory have the rhetorical intention of creating rhetorical experiences for tourists or visitors that do the work of influence. And so oftentimes museums will want you to experience certain things in different ways. There's a difference, in other words, in perhaps a carriage ride in Charleston versus going to a series of exhibits inside a place, or going to the gala tours. I mean, there are different things when people think, for instance, if you go to the gala tours and you were taught how to make some of those baskets. That's a lot different than just reading something about the history of all that type of stuff in a museum. And so some places of public memory create these experiences intentionally, in part perhaps to help you understand, but also to maybe give you a new understanding, forging you a new identity, create a different shared sense of community. 2, the rhetorical experience can create a new identity and new community for tourists. That's what I just said. 3, that this is a jazz experience is very important because jazz is sort of a process of ensemble that teaches civic attitudes. And so there's something very, very important, I think, here that Clark touches on about this being all about jazz. And so I'll let you sort of read that. That doesn't mean I don't think that other things, that's the only type of museum that could be a rhetorical experience. But there's something about jazz that teaches civic lessons, I think, or offers civic attitudes that's particularly interesting. And then for rhetorical experiences like the one in Harlem is epidictic rhetoric, which I thought was really interesting. That's perhaps, I think, the most interesting point of the entire chapter. That is, these experiences are rhetorical, but they serve as epidictic rhetoric. I'll let you read more about that, but if you've taken any of my classes, epidictic rhetoric is one of the types of discourses or forms of discourses or forms of rhetoric that